Welcome to the Golden Gems podcast. Today we're taking a deep dive into James Erdman III, the CIA whistleblower who exposed the intelligence community's suppression of the COVID-19 lab leak conclusion.
And, just imagine walking into a room knowing that the moment you sit down and turn on the microphone, you are effectively declaring war on your own agency.
Yeah. It's massive because just 3 days ago, on May 13th, 2026, a senior CIA operations officer literally walked into the Dirksen Senate office building, raised his right hand, and testified under oath that the U.S. government intentionally buried its own scientific consensus.
Right, under oath.
Under oath. He laid out this meticulously documented case that the intelligence community knew COVID-19 likely originated from a laboratory in Wuhan, China, and then, systematically engineered a cover-up. So our mission for this deep dive is to trace Erdman's explosive claims, unpack the timeline, and really examine the circular credentialing of the scientists involved.
And look at the profound implications this has for public trust, which are just staggering. But before we go any further into the timeline or the testimony, we need to set some ground rules for you, the listener.
Absolutely.
What we are doing today is conducting an impartial forensic audit of sworn Senate testimony. This is a matter of public record. It was broadcast on C-SPAN. We are not here to validate a political narrative or, take ideological sides.
Right. This isn't about left or right.
Exactly. We are reporting the exact facts, dates, and structural arguments regarding these unprecedented allegations precisely as they were laid out in the source material. It's really an examination of the mechanics of institutional behavior when an agency is under extreme stress.
And to understand that behavior, we really have to start by looking at who James Erdman III actually is, because his background is the lens through which this entire collision makes sense.
It really is.
When we picture an intelligence analyst, it's so easy to imagine someone shaped by, a political science think tank or an Ivy League policy fellowship. But Erdman's professional lineage traces back to one of the most uncompromising environments imaginable, which is the 2nd Battalion's 75th Ranger Regiment.
Yeah, he was a non-commissioned officer deployed to the Middle East, South Asia, Europe, all before joining the CIA in 2013. And he brought this highly specific technical expertise in bioinformatics and biometrics.
Which, for anyone listening who isn't a virologist, bioinformatics isn't just like looking at a virus through a microscope. It's more like reading the metadata on a digital photograph.
That's a great way to put it.
Right, you aren't just seeing the picture, you were seeing the exact timestamp, the camera model, the GPS coordinates of where that picture was taken. He reads the residue of biological systems.
And that specific background gave Erdman what we can call a binary professional disposition.
A binary disposition.
Right. Because the bureaucratic instinct of the intelligence community, especially at the management level, is often to soften data for policymakers. Managers look for consensus, they hedge their bets, they try to create an institutional comfort zone.
Right, they don't want to rock the boat too much.
Exactly. But Erdman didn't operate that way. He was tracking East Asia biosecurity. He understood the architecture of high-containment laboratories in Wuhan as a technical reality. He knew the air filtration standards, the biosafety protocols, the waste management system.
And when those systems fail, they leave a trail.
They absolutely leave a trail.
Yeah.
And his training dictated that the data on the ground is the only truth that matters. In a firefight, a target is neutralized or it isn't. In raw genetic data, a synthetic marker is either there or it isn't. There is no room for a politically convenient interpretation.
Which means this ground truth mentality fundamentally clashed with the agency's instinct to manage the narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And he was actually fighting this battle on two fronts simultaneously.
Yeah, the internal and the external.
Right. While he was inside the CIA dealing with what he saw as intelligence suppression, he also co-founded a grassroots organization called Feds for Freedom during the rollout of the vaccine mandates.
Which is a huge detail.
It is. He was organizing pushback against mandates for federal workers and the military. So he's watching the external policy apparatus being built on a foundation he internally knew was flawed. That brings a tremendous amount of friction to his daily professional life, which leads us right into 2025.
Right. So from March 2025 to April 2026, Erdman was detailed to the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And DNI Tulsi Gabbard established a specialized unit called the Directors Initiatives Group, or the DI.
DI, yeah.
And the mandate for the D was to review COVID origins and investigate the alleged weaponization of the intelligence community. Erdman led this investigative team, and his analysts were some of the most technically qualified biological experts in the entire American intelligence apparatus.
And what did they find?
Well, they analyzed the data and repeatedly reached the exact same conclusion. The evidence pointed to a laboratory incident at the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Let's break down what they were actually seeing in that data, because they weren't just guessing. They were citing specific gain-of-function markers in the SARS-CoV-2 genome.
Yeah.
And just to be clear on the terminology for the listener, gain-of-function research involves taking a pathogen and intentionally engineering it to be more transmissible or more lethal, usually to study how a future pandemic might behave.
Right, you're making it better at infecting people.
Exactly. And Erdman's team found markers consistent with this kind of engineering. They also tracked the epidemiological patterns of the initial outbreak in Wuhan, and they pointed to the glaring lack of an intermediate animal host.
The famous missing link.
Right. The theoretical animal that supposedly carried the virus from bats to humans, which years later has literally never been found. But every time these highly credentialed experts concluded it was a lab leak, CIA management softened or just buried the report.
And the breaking point for all of this occurred during a really highly specific 5-day window. Between August 12 and August 17, 2023, the official CIA assessment inexplicably changed.
It just shifted completely.
In standard intelligence tradecraft, analysts use confidence metrics to express their certainty. They say they have low, moderate, or high confidence in an assessment because, absolute certainty is virtually non-existent when you're dealing with foreign intelligence or novel biology.
It's always a probability.
Right. But during those 5 days, management dropped those standard metrics entirely and inserted the word precisely into the final document to support a natural origin theory.
I'm really struggling to understand how a seasoned intelligence manager justifies that word choice. I mean, if standard intelligence relies on low, moderate, or high confidence, dropping the word precisely into a biological assessment isn't just an exaggeration. It's the ultimate tell.
It really is.
It's like a weatherman suddenly guaranteeing exactly 412 drops of rain on a Tuesday. It defies the very nature of the discipline.
It deviates completely from standard analytical language. And it signals that the narrative was being forced from the top down. Erdman testified that what made this profoundly dangerous was the establishment of a reward system for compliance.
Wait, a reward system?
Yes. The analysts who complied with this unnatural linguistic shift, the ones who produced the desired natural origin assessment, they received exceptional performance reviews and financial bonuses shortly after.
Wow.
When you reward analysts for conforming to a predetermined conclusion, rather than following the raw data, you are no longer conducting scientific analysis. You have transitioned into manufacturing consensus.
And for you listening, this might just sound like government semantics, right? A squabble over adjectives. But that single word, change asserting a natural origin precisely, is what eventually provided the legal and political cover for the policies that affected your daily life.
Exactly. But if internal CIA management couldn't get their own ground-level analysts to organically rubber stamp a natural origin theory, they had a problem. They needed external validation.
They had to look outside.
Right. They had to look outside the agency to build a manufactured consensus that they could then point back to as justification. And this is what brings Anthony Fauci and the broader scientific community into Erdman's testimony.
Right. Let's look at the 90-day assessment ordered by President Biden in mid-2021. The entire world was watching this, waiting for the American intelligence community to deliver a definitive answer. And 7 CIA subject matter experts concluded it was a lab accident.
7 of them.
And when they refused to alter their findings to fit a natural origin narrative, they faced severe professional retaliation.
And Erdman provided specific timestamps to map out how Anthony Fauci intentionally intervened to suppress those exact findings.
Let's go through those timestamps.
The first one is February 3, 2020. Fauci convened a private conference call where leading scientists explicitly feared a lab leak. Yet shortly after that call, those exact same scientists authored the famous proximal origin paper.
Which was huge in the media.
Oh, massive. It was a highly publicized letter published in a major scientific journal that publicly dismissed the lab leak theory as a conspiracy. It effectively killed the lab leak hypothesis in the mainstream media for years.
Years?
And Erdman noted that one of the authors who suddenly changed his tune and signed that paper subsequently received a $9 million grant from Fauci's agency, NIAID.
I mean, the financial transaction there is impossible to ignore. And then we have the second timestamp, which is June 4th, 2021. Fauci inserted himself directly into the intelligence community's 90-day review.
Right.
A senior analyst actually raised alarm bells about this intervention, noting a blatant contradiction. Because Fauci had publicly denied having expertise on coronaviruses when it was convenient, yet privately, he was directing the highest-level intelligence investigation into one.
He steered the intelligence community to consult his own hand-picked scientists.
Exactly. And many of these scientists were individuals he funded, and many had participated in the Event 201 pandemic simulation back in October 2019. This is what Erdman described as the circular credentialing machine. Fauci directed federal investigators toward a curated list of scientists whose work relied on his funding. Those scientists reviewed the intelligence and predictably shaped the official assessment to downplay a lab leak.
It's a closed loop.
Completely. Policymakers and intelligence managers then cited that official assessment as the definitive scientific consensus. When internal CIA analysts reached a different conclusion based on raw genomic data, their managers overruled them by pointing right back to the external consensus built by Fauci's curated list.
It sounds exactly like a student writing their own final exam, taking the test, and then grading it themselves, all while getting paid for it by the school.
That is the perfect analogy for it.
And one of the key figures in that curated list was Ralph Barrick, a virologist at the University of North Carolina. Barrick wasn't just an observer. He actually collaborated with the Wuhan Institute of Virology on engineering coronaviruses.
He advised the intelligence community on biological weapons.
Yes. And in 2015, he even helped rewrite the definition of gain-of-function research to bypass a federal funding pause. So the very person who helped engineer the type of dangerous research being investigated is the one advising the intelligence community on how to interpret the investigation.
And the timeline regarding Barrick is a critical piece of this forensic audit. Barrick received a formal notice of debarment from the Department of Health and Human Services on May 12, 2026. The debarment notice cited a pattern of deception in virus studies conducted more than a decade ago. It effectively removes a central pillar of the gain-of-function research network.
Wait, let me stop you there, because the timing of that sounds like something out of a geopolitical thriller. You are saying Ralph Barrick receives his formal debarment on May 12th, exactly one day before Erdman gives his explosive Senate testimony on May 13th.
One day before, yes.
How does the intelligence community mechanically justify these events to Congress? I mean, Erdman's team, the DIG, was clearly getting dangerously close to exposing this entire circular structure.
Well, the response to the DIG getting close was a systemic blockade. Erdman testified that the CIA illegally monitored the computer and phone usage of DIG personnel.
Illegally monitored their own people.
Yes. They administered polygraph tests to analysts who were simply doing their jobs. They fired a whistleblower contractor just one day after that person met with the DIG to provide information.
Unbelievable.
And when Congress unanimously passed a bill requiring the declassification and release of COVID-19 origin documents, the intelligence community stonewalled them. Congress received exactly 5 heavily redacted pages instead of the thousands of documents that exist.
5 pages. So the retaliation wasn't just individual, it was institutional. And the escalation peaked when the DIG was dissolved in January 2026.
Right, because DNI Tulsi Gabbard had been actively processing a massive cache of documents for declassification under a presidential executive order.
And when the DIG ceased operations, the CIA immediately stepped in and seized 40 boxes of historical files from Gabbard's purview. And these weren't just administrative memos, these were files detailing the JFK assassination and MKUltra.
We have to pause and explain the gravity of that for a second.
Yeah, please do.
MKUltra was the CIA's illegal mind control program that ran from 1953 to 1973. It involved psychological torture, the administration of LSD, and severe experimentation on unwitting American citizens.
It's some of the darkest history in the agency.
Absolutely. And Representative Anna Paulina Luna had to threaten congressional subpoenas just to demand those historical documents back.
You have to look at the mechanical significance of the CIA swooping in the moment the oversight group dissolved. Erdman's testimony describes this as an architecture of impunity.
An architecture of impunity.
Right. This is not merely a procedural dispute between government agencies over document handling protocols. It is a deliberate structural mechanism designed to circumvent legal and congressional oversight. Look at the converging timeline. A foundational gain-of-function scientist is debarred one day before the testimony.
Yeah.
The legal statute of limitations for Anthony Fauci potentially lying to Congress expired exactly 2 days before the testimony.
2 days.
The historical files proving a legacy of the agency experimenting on its own citizens are seized by that same agency before they can reach the public through declassification. It is an apparatus utilizing every legal and bureaucratic lever to run out the clock and protect itself.
So how does this bureaucratic maneuvering translate to the person listening right now?
Right. Why does this matter to you?
Think about why you, or someone you know, got the COVID-19 shot. Maybe it was a personal health choice, but for millions of Americans, it was a requirement to keep a livelihood.
Yeah.
Huh?
Maybe it was because of the Key to NYC program, and you couldn't take your kids to a restaurant or a sports arena without showing a vaccine card.
The government offered massive incentives. New York's $100 payouts, Ohio's $1 million lottery, and deployed sweeping punitive measures for noncompliance. All of this was predicated on the Emergency Use Authorization, the EUA.
And the EUA requires a strict, legally defined risk versus benefit calculation.
Exactly. But if the public knew that this virus was likely a lab-engineered pathogen directly tied to U.S.-funded gain-of-function research, the entire legal and moral foundation for those mandates would have collapsed.
Because that risk calculation is the philosophical stake at the heart of Erdman's testimony. The EUA framework allowed mRNA products to be deployed without full, long-term clinical trial completion.
Which is legally justified based on the premise of a natural, unpredictable, and uncontrollable crisis.
Right. The origin of the pathogen directly alters how a society calculates the risk of the intervention. If the crisis is manufactured, the threshold for mandating experimental countermeasures changes drastically.
And it's crucial to add nuance here. Erdman's testimony does not invalidate the mRNA vaccines themselves. The underlying data documents that they reduced severe illness and hospitalization in high-risk populations.
Right. The medical tech itself isn't the issue he's raising.
Exactly. What his testimony exposes is that the policy apparatus forcing those vaccines upon the public, making them the non-negotiable price of participation in society, was built on a managed lie.
To put it in perspective, it's like buying a house because the city inspector swore the foundation was solid bedrock. You buy it, you move in, and years later you find out the inspector knew all along it was poured over a sinkhole, and they intentionally hid the engineering report to force the sale.
That's horrifying, but accurate.
Right. You still have a house, it might even keep you warm, but the transaction was fundamentally based on deception. The inspector removed your agency to make an informed choice about the risk you were taking.
The real tragedy is that the public was not treated as a partner in navigating a generational health crisis. They were managed by administrators who decided what information the public was allowed to handle.
They were treated as assets to be managed.
Yes. And this tragedy transcends political lines. The virus didn't check voter registration. Americans of every political identity got sick, stood in line for vaccines to keep their jobs, and paid the devastating economic cost of the lockdowns.
Yep.
Yet, during Erdman's testimony, a hearing literally titled Whistleblower Testimony on the COVID Cover-Up, not a single Democratic senator attended.
Not one.
Their absence makes the legislative response to the cover-up highly partisan, even though the cover-up itself harmed everyone equally. It demonstrates how institutional preservation often supersedes bipartisan truth-seeking.
Looking at the empty chairs in that hearing room really forces you to confront the historical legacy of moments like this. Erdman isn't the first person to sit at that table and challenge the intelligence apparatus. He joins a specific lineage of whistleblowers.
Yeah, a very costly lineage.
John Kiriakou exposed the CIA's waterboarding program and went to federal prison. Thomas Drake exposed illegal, warrantless NSA surveillance and faced draconian espionage charges. Daniel Hale proved drone strikes were indiscriminately killing civilians and was sentenced to 45 months.
The pattern is bleak but consistent. The truth teller pays a heavy, life-altering price, while the architects of the lie collect their performance bonuses, secure lucrative private sector grants, and walk out the front door.
But the distinction with Erdman is that he operated entirely inside the approved system. He didn't leak documents to a newspaper. He followed the official channel, leading the dig under Gabbard's oversight.
And the system still responded, with documents stonewalling, surveillance, and suppression. But because he did it this way, his testimony is now part of the permanent public record. It has triggered immediate legislative fallout.
Like Senator Rand Paul's proposed Risky Research Review Act.
Exactly, which would establish mandatory independent review standards for gain-of-function funding and legally protect analysts whose findings are overridden by managers. And Senator Ron Johnson is calling for a new church committee.
Which is huge. We have to remember that the original church committee in 1975 is the investigative body that exposed MKUltra in the first place.
The exact same files the CIA just seized back from the declassification process.
And you have Senator Josh Hawley pointing out that the public is desperate for accountability, holding up the 5 heavily redacted pages Congress received when they legally demanded the truth.
Erdman testified under oath that there are 2,000 highly classified documents related to COVID origins that Tulsi Gabbard is still fighting to get released. He sat in front of the cameras, fully aware the CIA was watching his every word, and dismantled the institutional narrative.
Which leaves us with a chilling structural question for you to mull over long after this discussion ends. Who audits the auditors?
If the exact same agency that dictates what its own scientists are allowed to conclude is also empowered to seize 40 boxes of historical files about experimenting on its own citizens, specifically to keep them out of your hands, where does the truth actually live?
Thank you for listening to the Golden Gems podcast. We'll be back next time with another deep dive. Until then, keep exploring, keep listening, and keep celebrating the power of uncompromising voices.